Who was Kate Moss really? Just a skinny girl discovered by accident? Or the woman who forever shattered the ideal of beauty? Throughout the 90s, when the world worshipped perfect curves and flawless smiles, she appeared thin, pale, distant gaze, no traditional glamour. And yet, the fashion world fell at her feet. To the industry, Kate Moss was a revolution. To the press, a constant scandal. To herself, a child who was never prepared to carry so much weight. Success, excess, self-destruction. While brands turned her into a millionaire, her personal life slowly fell apart. Because Kate Moss didn't just change fashion, she changed the way the world looked at beauty, and the price that had to be paid for it. Was she a victim of the system, or the architect of her own downfall? Kate Moss was born in 1974, in Croydon, south of London. Not into a world of luxury, runways, and flashing cameras, but into an ordinary family, marked by instability. Her parents separated when she was still young. From that moment on, Kate grew up with a constant feeling of fragility, of never fully belonging anywhere. At school, she didn't stand out. She wasn't the popular girl. She wasn't the brightest student, and she definitely didn't fit the beauty ideal of the time. She was shy, quiet, too thin, too different. And yet, it was precisely that difference that would change her destiny. At the age of 14, in a New York airport, Kate Moss was discovered by Sarah Dukas, founder of the Supermodel management agency. She wasn't looking for fame. She wasn't dreaming of runways. She was just a teenager returning from vacation. Fate, or pure coincidence. When Kate began working as a model, many doubted her. She had no curves. She didn't have an imposing height. She lacked the classic idea of glamour. But she had something no one could quite explain. A magnetic presence. A vulnerability that held the camera captive. While other models posed, Kate existed in front of the lens. The fashion industry, drained by the excess and artificial gloss of the 80s, found in her a new narrative. Imperfect beauty, raw, real. Without knowing it, Kate Moss would become the symbol of a generation. And also fashion's most dangerous experiment. Because when the world decides to adore you at such a young age, no one teaches you how to survive it. In the early 90s, fashion was tired. Tired of excess. Tired of artificial shine. Tired of perfect supermodels who looked like untouchable goddesses. The world was changing, and fashion was changing with it. And in the middle of that collective exhaustion, Kate Moss appeared as an unexpected answer. She wasn't tall. She wasn't voluptuous. She didn't smile like a queen. But she conveyed something no one else had. A hypnotic fragility. While major fashion houses continued to bet on powerful bodies and exaggerated glamour, certain creatives began looking in the opposite direction. They wanted something more real, more raw, closer to the street. And that was when Calvin Klein entered the scene. The collaboration between Kate Moss and Calvin Klein wasn't just an advertising campaign. It was a cultural rupture. The images were simple, almost uncomfortable. White backgrounds, minimal underwear, empty stares, thin bodies, almost ethereal. Kate didn't pose. Kate existed. For some, those campaigns were art. For others, a dangerous provocation. But for the industry, they were an absolute success. Overnight, Kate Moss went from being a strange promise to becoming the new face of global fashion. And with that brutal rise, a term was born that would define an entire decade: heroin chic. A style that glorified extremely thin bodies, pale skin, visible dark circles, an aesthetic of exhaustion and loss of control, a beauty that seemed to say, "I'm not okay, and I don't care." Kate Moss didn't invent heroin chic, but she embodied it like no one else. Her image began to appear everywhere. Magazines, billboards, runways, editorials seeking to replicate that same sense of elegant emptiness. While the world admired her, criticism didn't take long to arrive. Concerned parents, alarmed doctors, politicians accusing fashion of promoting destructive ideals. Even the then President of the United States, Bill Clinton, publicly criticized the heroin chic aesthetic, calling it irresponsible. But the industry didn't listen, because Kate Moss sold, and she sold like no one else. At 18, 19, 20 years old, Kate was already a multimillionaire. She signed contracts that surpassed those of many veteran supermodels. Her face became a brand. And yet, No one asked the essential question: what was happening to the person behind the image? Because while the world celebrated her fragile aesthetic, Kate lived under constant pressure. Pressure to stay thin. Pressure to be different. Pressure not to disappoint the myth others had created. In interviews from that era, Kate spoke very little. She avoided going deep. She smiled uncomfortably. She didn't look like a young woman enjoying success. She looked like someone surviving it. Fashion turned her into a symbol, but it never gave her the tools to protect herself. And in that environment, excess came as part of the package. Endless parties, sleepless nights, a social circle where limits didn't exist. While photographers followed her day and night, Kate began to disappear behind her own public image. Heroin chic wasn't just an aesthetic. It was a dangerous lifestyle that normalized exhaustion, self-destruction, and emotional emptiness. And Kate Moss was at the center of it all. For many designers, she represented the raw truth of the era. For the media, she was a controversial muse. For young people, a role model, without understanding the real cost. As her fame grew, so did the distance between Kate and a normal life. She was no longer the shy girl from Croydon, but she wasn't the owner of her own destiny either. Because when you become the face of an aesthetic revolution, neither your body nor your image truly belong to you anymore. Kate Moss's rise was fast, too fast, and as often happens in fashion, when someone rises that high, the fall is never far away. Because while the world was celebrating her as an icon, the shadows were already beginning to close in, and the worst was still yet to come. By the mid-90s, Kate Moss was no longer just a supermodel. She was a cultural phenomenon, a symbol, a magnet for the press. And when fashion finished using her image, the media began using her life. Fame was no longer a promise. Now it was a pursuit. Every night out was photographed, every gesture analyzed, every silence turned into a headline. Kate Moss never learned how to live with fame. Fame dragged her along. In that context, a figure appeared who would mark her story forever: Johnny Depp. When their relationship began, the press labeled them the most dangerous and magnetic couple of the 90 seconds. They were young, they were famous, they were uncontrollable. Their relationship was built on extreme passion and constant conflict. Intense love, public fights, destroyed hotel rooms, and a permanent sense of chaos. For photographers, it was pure gold. For Kate, it was an emotional spiral no one knew how to stop. While Johnny Depp was seen as the rebellious genius of Hollywood, Kate Moss began to carry a different label: the troubled girl. The narrative shifted. She was no longer the delicate muse. Now she was the example of what a young woman should not be. Endless parties, erratic appearances, awkward interviews. The press wasn't trying to understand her. It was trying to expose her. And in that media circus, rumors turned into absolute truths. Tabloid magazines began openly talking about excess, addictions, and self-destruction, without clear proof, without context, without compassion. Kate Moss didn't respond. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain, because she had learned something very early on. In fame, explaining is never enough. Meanwhile, the fashion industry played both sides. On one hand, it kept hiring her. On the other, it pretended to be concerned. They used her, and then pointed at her. Designers, photographers, and brands that had built their aesthetic around Kate Moss now washed their hands of her. But they kept calling her. They kept paying her. They kept needing her. The pressure was constant. Kate was barely in her early 20s and was carrying expectations that not even a balanced adult could endure. The body that Heroin chic had glorified was now a target of criticism. Too thin, too tired, too real. And when the myth began to show cracks, the press decided to speed up the fall. Every badly timed photo became a scandal. Every night out, a public trial. Every mistake, a sentence. Kate Moss became an uncomfortable mirror for society. She showed what happens when perfection is demanded, and then fragility is punished. The relationship with Johnny Depp ended, leaving Kate emotionally exposed and media-wise alone. She herself would admit years later that the breakup left her completely lost. But at the time, no one was listening to her voice. Only the image mattered. The model who had redefined beauty was now presented as a problem that needed to be controlled. And then came the breaking point, an episode that would not only affect her career, but would put her very existence in the industry at risk. Because the question was no longer whether Kate Moss could continue being a supermodel. The question was different. Would the fashion world allow her to survive? When the system decides you are no longer useful, the fall is not silent. It is public, humiliating, and brutal. And Kate Moss was about to face the darkest moment of her life. In the early years of 2000, the name Kate Moss stopped being linked only to fashion. Now it was associated with a dangerous word: scandal. The press no longer followed her to capture beauty. They followed her to capture mistakes. Every stolen photograph seemed to confirm what many wanted to believe: that Kate Moss was out of control, that she was the symbol of a decadent era, that fashion had gone too far. And then the inevitable happened. A media episode exploded like a bomb. Front pages filled with aggressive headlines. Brands began to hesitate. Contracts were frozen. Suddenly, Kate Moss went from being indispensable to being a risk. In the fashion industry, there are no guaranteed second chances. When the image is damaged, the system does not wait for explanations. For weeks, there was total silence. Kate disappeared from events, from runways, from campaigns. For the first time since she was 14 years old, there were no photographers waiting for her. There were no urgent calls. There was no packed schedule. There was only one brutal question: was it all over? Many bet that it was. Some designers began to distance themselves publicly. Fashion editors spoke of new faces. The narrative was clear. Kate Moss was the past. But what few understood was that Kate had already hit bottom before. And she was still standing. Away from the flashes, Kate faced something she had avoided for years: herself. For the first time, there was no character to maintain, no expectations to fulfill, no aesthetic to embody, just survival. During that period, Kate made decisions that would shape her future. Silent decisions, without press conferences, without heroic speeches, because real change is almost never spectacular. It is uncomfortable, slow, and lonely. While the world debated whether she deserved to return or not, she worked on rebuilding her balance, her routine, her control. She wasn't trying to go back to being the fragile girl of Heroin chic, nor the untouchable supermodel of the 90 seconds. She was looking for something much more difficult: to keep existing in a system that had already condemned her. And then something unexpected happened. The same brands that had stepped away began to look again. Because, despite everything, the name Kate Moss still carried power. The public hadn't forgotten her. Fashion hadn't either. When she returned, she didn't do it with scandal. She did it with presence, selective campaigns, measured appearances, a more restrained, more conscious image. Kate Moss was no longer trying to please everyone. She had learned that was impossible. Her comeback was neither immediate nor spectacular. It was strategic. Every step was calculated, every silence intentional. And little by little, the narrative changed. From troubled model to survivor, from symbol of excess to a woman who withstood the system. The industry, always opportunistic, embraced her again. But this time, Kate Moss was no longer a child. She had understood something essential. In fashion, power is not only in beauty, but in knowing when to say no. The public collapse did not destroy her. It forced her to redefine herself. And that silent reinvention would become the foundation of the most powerful phase of her career. Because Kate Moss was not coming back. She was being reborn. And what came next was not just a second chance. It was absolute control over her own legend. When Kate Moss returned definitively to the industry, she no longer did so as a girl discovered by chance. She returned as someone who had survived. Fashion welcomed her back, but this time the rules had changed. Kate Moss understood something that very few models of her generation grasped in time. Beauty is fleeting, but power is built. She no longer accepted every campaign. She chose. She negotiated. She set conditions. For the first time, Kate Moss stopped being just a face and began acting like a brand. Her image became more solid, more elegant, more intentional. She was still thin. She was still enigmatic. But she no longer projected fragility. She projected control. The major fashion houses returned one by one. Dior, Yves Saint Laurent, Versace, Chanel. Not out of nostalgia, but because Kate Moss still possessed something no new model could replicate: history. In an industry obsessed with youth, Kate Moss represented experience, resilience, and authenticity. Photographers looked at her differently, no longer as an aesthetic object, but as a creative collaborator. She knew which angle worked, what image she wanted to project, what story she was telling. Kate Moss had learned how to direct her own myth, and then came a decisive step: independence. Kate began diversifying her presence beyond the runway. Design, collaborations, business. Her collaboration with Topshop marked a turning point. She wasn't a model lending her name. She was a creator involved in every decision. Accessible clothing, with a rock spirit, without losing sophistication. The response was immediate. Record sales, endless lines. A new generation connecting with her style. Kate Moss had achieved something extraordinary, remaining relevant without trying to look young. While other figures disappeared, she transformed. And in that process, she also redefined the role of the supermodel. She was no longer just the face of a campaign. She was a cultural influence. Magazines, documentaries, exhibitions. Her figure began to be analyzed as a historical phenomenon. Kate Moss was no longer competing with anyone. She had stepped outside the game. Her presence at events was discreet, yet magnetic. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her silence became part of her power. And meanwhile, her personal life began to stabilize. Far from the media chaos of the 90 seconds, Kate sought balance. Not perfection, balance. She had learned that excess was not freedom. It was a trap. Becoming a mother, Kate Moss experienced a profound transformation. For the first time, someone depended on her in a way that had nothing to do with the industry. That quiet change influenced everything. Her decisions, her priorities, her relationship with fame. Kate Moss didn't need to be everywhere. She knew her value lay in scarcity. And so, without grand speeches, without forced redemption campaigns, Kate Moss cemented her place as a living legend. Not because she was perfect, but because she had gone through hell and returned with her own identity. Fashion had created her. The press tried to destroy her, but Kate Moss did something more difficult than both. She survived by being herself. And when a figure achieves that, she can no longer be replaced. Because trends pass, faces change, but legends remain. As time passed, Kate Moss stopped running. Not because fashion no longer wanted her, but because she no longer needed to prove anything. Becoming a mother was a quiet turning point, but a profound one. For the first time, her life did not revolve around campaigns, runways, or covers. There was a different responsibility, more real, more human. Kate Moss never tried to sell an image of perfect motherhood. She didn't give emotional interviews. She didn't construct a sweetened narrative. She simply lived. And that attitude, so consistent with her character, only strengthened her aura. While the fashion world entered the era of social media, where everything is documented and displayed, Kate Moss did exactly the opposite. She became scarce. She didn't post constantly. She didn't comment on everything. She didn't need to explain herself. In an industry saturated with exposure, her silence became an act of power. And, paradoxically, that made her even more influential. Because even though she no longer dominated every cover, her impact was everywhere. New generations of models grew up under her shadow. More diverse bodies, freer attitudes, a less rigid idea of beauty. Kate Moss had opened a door that could no longer be closed. It wasn't about imitating her thinness, but about understanding her deeper message. Beauty does not have a single form or a single narrative. Young designers cited her as a reference. Photographers sought that emotional rawness that she had normalized. Even when the industry tried to move away from heroin chic, Kate's influence remained, transformed, reinterpreted. Because her true legacy was not a specific aesthetic, but the breaking of the mold. Kate Moss taught fashion that a woman did not need to be perfect to be powerful. That vulnerability could also be magnetic. That mystery had value. Unlike other supermodels, Kate did not represent unreachable aspiration. She represented contradiction, fragility, humanity, and that connected with millions. Over time, her figure began to be seen not only as an icon, but as a warning. A story that showed the price of growing up too fast, of being adored without protection, of becoming a symbol before being an adult, but also as proof that reinvention is possible. Kate Moss did not deny her past. She did not romanticize it. She did not exploit it. She integrated it, and that made her credible in a world that punishes mistakes, but pretends to celebrate authenticity. Today, Kate Moss no longer needs to dominate the scene. Her presence is enough. She appears when she wants, collaborates when she's interested, disappears when she needs to. She has achieved something few public figures ever do, living outside the cycle of media destruction. Her legacy is not only in the iconic photographs, nor in the historic campaigns, nor in the headlines. It is in the freedom other women found to be different, to not fit in, to not ask permission. Kate Moss was not a perfect heroine. She was a woman moving through an unforgiving system, and she survived. That, in itself, is a form of victory. In the end, Kate Moss was never just a supermodel. She was an experiment, a rupture, an uncomfortable mirror. The industry lifted her up when it needed something new. It celebrated her when she sold, and it was ready to abandon her when she stopped being convenient. Kate Moss lived what many only observe from the outside: absolute glory and the emptiness that comes afterward. She changed the idea of beauty forever. She proved that fitting in was not necessary to dominate, that imperfection could be powerful, that mystery held more value than manufactured perfection. But her story also left a clear warning. Fame without protection destroys. Early success comes at a price, and no system truly takes care of those who sustain it. Kate Moss survived because she learned how to say no, because she understood that controlling her image was the only way to reclaim her life. Today, she doesn't need to shout to be heard. She doesn't need to appear to exist. Her name is already part of fashion history, an icon, a warning, a living legend. And perhaps the most important lesson Kate Moss left behind is not on the runways, but in something much simpler. Fame can give you everything, but it can also take everything away if you don't know who you are.